My name is Rebecca Kirk. I'm a PDHP teacher at Beverly Hills Intensive English Centre. This unit that I'm going to talk about is a health unit for a junior level 1 class. So 11 to 14-year-old students who are relatively new to learning English. The aim of this unit of work was to help the students prepare to do a spoken presentation to the class. We'd noticed that one of the things that was really lacking in these presentations was structure. We wanted to encourage the students to introduce their main points in the introduction, elaborate on them in the body with examples and explanations, and then to summarize them in the conclusion. This wasn't happening. We were finding new ideas were being pulled in everywhere, and introductions were lengthy and full of examples and explanations that should be saved for later on in the piece. And while working on this structure, we also wanted to help the students develop their public speaking skills. At the beginning of this unit, I showed the students an example of what I was hoping they would be able to produce at the end. When the students watched this sample presentation, they used a simple marking criteria to gauge what they thought of the presentation in terms of stance, eye contact, and clarity. We then looked at a transcript, and with this transcript I gave the students a translated dictionary. So it was translated into each of the languages that we had in the class. The students used this dictionary to identify the dictionary words in the transcript and try to make some meaning out of the speech that they'd seen. Vitamins.
Vitamins.
Immune system.
Immune system.
Positive.
Positivo.
Gigi.
And academics? Concentrate.
Concentrar.
Very good. The next step was to use a picture essay. It was the same information as the transcript and as the oral presentation, but this time represented through pictures. Actually, it's the same as this one, but one is with words and one is with pictures. But the information is the same. The hope was that this would help the students to see the structure, that they could recognise that the pictures used in the introduction were then repeated with examples beneath them in the body, and then repeated again in the conclusion. We can see some vegetables. What else can you see?
Man is sick, and heart and mind.
We spent some time as a class discussing this picture essay, talking about what we could see, what meaning we could draw out of it, what we thought the main points of the presentation were. The students then broke into language groups and got a new worksheet that used the same pictures but with space for writing. They used this worksheet to write a plan for their oral presentation. They wrote in their first language. Again, the hope was that by removing the barrier of translating and thinking in a language that they were not yet that competent in, that they'd be able to focus on structure and get clear, coherent meaning in their plan and then in their presentation. The students completed these plans in language groups in their first language, and then in order for me to check, to give them some feedback, I got them to use colours to identify where they were talking about the same kind of information. So we took 3 colours and coloured the 3 main points in the introduction in a different colour each, and then the students had to go through their text and continue this colour code. So where they talked about point 1 in blue, they had to colour in blue again. This gave me some way of checking that they were using a coherent structure. From here, they used this plan to write a oral presentation in their first language. Following this, the students presented in their first language. They presented to students who didn't have the same first language as them. This gave the students confidence and also allowed the students marking to focus on the elements of presentation. After the students presented, they received the feedback form from their peers, and so they knew what areas to work on in the future before their final presentation. It was really good to see the students presenting in the L1. It was a confident side of them that we don't always get to see. The next step in this activity was to repeat the process but with different content. This term at school we had a visit from the oral health services. They came to the school and presented the students with some information, some in English and some in first languages, about oral health and how to take care of your teeth. So we used this content as the basis of our second presentation. They then used this plan in the L1 to write the presentation in the L1. From here, we translated back to English. I didn't want the students to type their entire plan into Google Translate and then spit out some gobbledygook. I gave them a limit. They were allowed to translate the 5 most important words. These words were then put on the board. We collected all the words from the class. There were a lot of overlap, and in the end we had about 12 or 15 words that the students had identified as important and that they needed to translate. We wrote these words on a piece of coloured paper each, and the students went around the room translating each word into their own language. These went on the back of the classroom wall, and the students used these and the knowledge in their own head, but no other sources, to translate their writing in L1 into English in order to prepare for their presentation. The students then copied this onto palm cards and completed their final oral presentation in front of the class. Taking this approach was a bit of a risk because it was a lot of small group activity and I wasn't able to monitor everything that they were doing because I couldn't read or understand everything that they were producing. I think this approach was successful in that it allowed the students to think about more complicated concepts such as structuring their writing in their first language, but ultimately producing an artifact in English.